Okay. Okay, here we go. Hey everyone, welcome to the Pregnancy After 40 podcast. I am your host, Michelle Johnson, and today we have special guest Casey Seiden. Casey Seiden is all things gestational diabetes, pre-diabetes, type 2 diabetes. So really looking forward to getting her input about gestational diabetes specifically. It is so prevalent. I've seen it in this group. As many of you may have known, I've had 3 children, 2 of them over the age of 40. And with my third one, I was actually diagnosed with gestational diabetes. And I kind of felt like I was in the dark when I was told that I had gestational diabetes. So I kind of let Casey know that before we actually started this podcast a couple weeks ago. So looking forward to all of her input. So Casey, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. So glad to be here.
Great. I know it's late in the evening, but definitely looking forward to everything you have to say. So if you were
so it's perfect time for me.
Good. Any of you who are joining live, if you have any questions, put them in the chat and we'll be sure to ask Casey at some point in the podcast towards the end. But again, so first we're just going to start, Casey, how you got involved in the specialty of pre-diabetes, type 2 diabetes, and again, specifically gestational diabetes.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm based out of New York City, and I did my graduate degree and my dietetic internship to become a registered dietitian here in New York. And one of my first jobs out of the internship was at a health clinic where diabetes was the focus. I was working in a lower income area, and so a lot of those people were struggling with metabolic disease and blood sugar issues. So I saw it the whole spectrum, a lot of pre-diabetes and tried to help with the prevention side, a lot of type 2 diabetes management, some type 1 and some gestational diabetes, but not a lot. So kind of pre-diabetes and type 2 was my bread and butter for a few years. And then last year, I got the opportunity to transfer jobs, and I was hired at a private clinic here in Manhattan that was a high-risk OB clinic. And it came with a learning curve. To be honest, I hadn't worked with a lot of gestational diabetes, so I learned a lot on the job, did a lot of reading, did a lot of research, and came to really fall in love with this population. I was thinking of becoming a mom myself, so working in the women's health space, working with these mama-to-be in this critical time was something that I just truly fell in love with. And gestational diabetes in particular, you know, it's such a short window. This was a very motivated population, and I just loved kind of the enthusiasm and dedication of these mamas.
Okay. So just out of curiosity, and I'm not sure if you know this or not, but when patients come into the office where you practice, do most women, are they already kind of pre-diabetic, or do they already have type 2 diabetes, or is the gestational diabetes diagnosis, is it usually just something that they're hearing and experiencing for the first time during their pregnancy?
It's a majority of just gestational diabetes. So it's that diabetes first discovered in pregnancy. I would say that's probably 90% of what I see. You know, maybe there's 7% that's kind of the undiagnosed or unbeknownst to them pre-diabetes that was existing prior to pregnancy and they just weren't tested. Or they didn't know. And then maybe the remaining kind of 2 to 3% was actually pre-diagnosed type 2 diabetes.
Okay. So in your experience with women coming in with gestational diabetes, what is the kind of like the percentage or the feel for patients who either can manage their gestational diabetes through diet, those who have to maybe take insulin, or those who are prescribed other oral medications? I was personally prescribed Metformin. What is the kind of the breakdown that you see?
Yeah, I mean, I try my darndest to give people kind of the benefit of the doubt, hold their hand for as long as we can to work on those diet and lifestyle changes so we keep them off medications. But we know that that's just not possible for some people. So I would say anywhere from like 80 to 85% of my patients were able to manage through just diet and lifestyle changes. So then the rest of them, my practice, our first line recommendation is usually going to insulin, and we can talk about maybe why that is later on. But, that remaining 10 to 15% is on some kind of medication, whether it's insulin, possibly an oral medication.
Okay, so if you can just kind of tell us the difference between the metformin and the insulin during pregnancy, because I know there's concerns. I remember when I was prescribed the metformin, it was kind of like, well, it passes through the placenta, whereas the insulin does it. And that's all I know. So I don't know much more than that, but if you can kind of like explain how all that works for people who are given the option, because I was told maybe, I might have to take insulin, and which kind of like freaked me out. So if you can kind of like just give us some information about those two different medications.
Yeah, they can be scary. When you hear medication in pregnancy, I think a lot of the times we just put our guard up. We don't want to take anything in pregnancy. It seems foreign. It's got to be not safe for a developing baby, right? But both of those options are definitely considered safe. We wouldn't recommend them if they weren't safe. So metformin is the oral medication that it does cross the placenta to an extent. It's still safe, but it does cross the placenta there. And some of the other side effects that might come with metformin is that it can cause a lot of like gastrointestinal upset. It could cause some kind of like diarrhea, some cramping. A lot of people don't tolerate metformin super well. And the other part about metformin is that it's a pill, so it only comes in fixed doses. There's only so much kind of tinkering and fine tuning with that oral medication that we can do. Whereas insulin, on the other hand, we kind of have limitless opportunities to titrate and to find that perfect dose that's going to work for you. And insulin is safe. It's not crossing the placenta. It's just the outside administration of a hormone that your body is naturally producing in pregnancy. It's just you're maybe not producing enough of it, or it's not working as efficiently. There is the risk of possibly having very low blood sugars with insulin. But that really, comes down to the management of it and being kind of cautious, working with your doctor to titrate and adjust that dose in a very safe manner that's still going to be effective and not give you those low blood sugars.
Okay. So I am going to ask a question that I see a lot. So, and I see this question in the group often. So usually women in the group, they find out that they're pregnant relatively early because most women at this age, they're trying to conceive. So they're pretty much on it as far as when they conceive. And so they usually do a glucose test early on in the pregnancy, usually earlier on when you're older, as opposed to maybe like in the 20 weeks plus when you're a little bit younger. Right. Okay, so it's kind of like a cheat thing. Like, how can a woman prepare for the initial glucose? And I'll tell you this now. So my experience is a lot of women are not passing the first 1 hour glucose test. And then it's kind of like, it almost seems like it's 50-50, like for the 3 hour one. What can women do to prepare for that first one? And then if they don't pass that one, the second one, the 3 hour one?
It's a good question. I mean, there's definitely no way to cheat these tests, right? So my best advice to prepare for them is, and possibly this is true of a lot of women in your group, and making maybe some assumptions here that women over a certain age, maybe they're getting pregnant through reproductive technologies or what have you, or they've just been planning for it for a really long time. So my best advice is, just like you've been planning to get pregnant, is plan for this possible diagnosis by getting your diet in tip-top shape pre-conception and in those early, weeks of the pregnancy. And we might be dealing with nausea or food aversions and want all the carbs. Not to say that if that's your path, that those first few weeks, then you're destined to get gestational diabetes. But even prior to that pregnancy, making sure that we are trying to focus on those nutrient-dense foods, looking at our added sugar intake, looking at our exercise and our movement habits, all of those, I think, are really the best way to prep for those tests. Because at the end of the day, we can't cheat them. And we can maybe talk about those tests and why you get the positive, and then maybe sometimes pass the second one with flying colors. Yeah, it's a tough situation.
Okay, well, yeah, let's talk about that. So just tell us about the different tests and what they mean, why you may fail the first one and then pass the second one.
This is why we have a two-step process in this country. Other countries are maybe using this kind of one-step process where they're just doing, rather than the 50-gram glucose drink, and then if you fail that, you go to do a 100-gram run. Other countries are maybe just doing this 75 one-step process, which happens to maybe overdiagnose people, which you would think is a good thing, but it can also come with some undue costs, extra burden for women. So we do the two-step. But sometimes that first 1 hour test, the 50-gram one, can give us a false positive. So, but then that's why we have the second step. You can go on and pass that one, no problem. And some of it can be impacted also, kind of how I was alluding to, by what was your diet pre-pregnancy. Sometimes people will get that false positive because they maybe had a very healthy, a very low carb diet. And that test was just, it was really a lot on their blood sugar. So we could get that false positive on the first one.
Okay. So this was my concern when I took the glucose test in my first pregnancy over 40. I was kind of like, okay, there is no way in real life I'm going to consume this much sugar in a liquid form at one time. Like, of course, I'm going to fail it. Does your practice, or do you know of any possible alternatives to taking the glucose test, or how do you manage someone? Or what suggestions do you make to someone who's like, well, I just really don't want to consume this sugary drink because it has products on there and different ingredients. It's, it's concerning to a lot of people.
And it can make women really sick. To be honest, I have people that go through that test and they cannot make it through all those blood draws because they'll vomit. It's not a comfortable test. There's lots of things flying out there. Some people say, oh, you can have the jelly beans or drink a fruit juice. Well, those aren't exactly equivalent to that glucose drink, unfortunately. So really, in my practice, the best thing that we recommend is to just do home monitoring. We'll set you up with a glucose monitor and we'll have you monitor your blood sugars in real time without making any diet changes. Although I know that's kind of hard when you're trying to pass this test kind of. But we'll have you do that for 2 weeks and we'll just kind of see, all right, what's going on really in your day-to-day? Are we suspicious that you might have it, or do things just look really great and you're in the clear?
Okay. So I'm going to ask another, I don't know if this is going to be a false positive or not, but so we're usually told to fast before we take the glucose test the day before. And we usually take it first thing in the morning. But for some people, and I think this was the case for me, I don't know, I'm not a doctor, but after you haven't eaten anything overnight, and then the first thing you consume in the morning is this sugary drink, and then your body starts kind of like dumping. I don't know if you're dumping insulin or you're dumping something that's sugar and making the numbers go really high. Is that the case with some people that, at a certain point, maybe in the middle of the night, your body's like, okay, you need some more sugar or insulin and we're just going to dump it into your body. And then you end up, failing this test.
Well, the good news is that's not really the case for the first test, right? For that first one, they're not drawing your blood fasting. So for that one, you don't have to come in fasting. You can eat, your eggs and avocado in the morning, and then 2 hours later, go in, take the test because they're not drawing it fasting. So you could do that. If you have to go on and do the second test, then that, they are going to test your fasting blood sugar. And, there is some you had to get up and walk or drive, get yourself to the doctor's office to get the blood drawn. The longer that you spend in that fasting period, like we're getting to, the higher chance possibly that your liver would dump some stored glucose out into your bloodstream, right? We need energy to do all those things, to walk, to drive. And if we're not consuming energy from food, your body's going to figure out a way to help you out because it thinks it's starving. So your hormones rise in the morning. They want to bring up your blood sugar. So there might be a little bit of that going on. But if your body's functioning well, if your pancreas is functioning well and your placenta is not putting out too many of these antagonizing hormones, then it shouldn't impact it that much and you should pass the test.
Okay.
Well, then it's that sign that there is maybe something underlying going on, maybe related to what the placenta is doing.
Okay. So when I was actually diagnosed with gestational diabetes for my last pregnancy, I was like, okay, and and the doctor kind of wanted to immediately put me on a low dose metformin. And I was kind of like, okay, well, just like give me a minute just to kind of figure this out, what I can do with my diet and all that. But I felt like, I was lost. I was kind of like sent home. They're like, manage your diet. There was no like direction as to what I should eat, what I shouldn't eat. And I had to kind of figure out what worked for me. What do you tell your clients, like if they are diagnosed with gestational diabetes, and what to do with their diet and how to manage it and for how long?
Yeah, and a lot of that is true. It's so personalized and so individualized. It is kind of a period of trial and error. But I do walk patients through kind of a structure, like, okay, here's generally how we should be looking to construct our meals and our snacks. Here's this balance that we should strike with carbohydrates. If you're a label reader, here's what to look for in terms of grams of carbohydrates, let's say. So I do like to provide some structure, and I provide lots of other resources, maybe brand recommendations that I've done research on or that patients have told me have worked for them. Because it could be a shared experience, right? I think we learn from so many other people that have been through it. And then it is trying and checking your blood sugar and learning from that reading and adapting from there. But there's a lot out there on the internet that might not be true for you. So you got to work with someone.
Okay. So this is like more your field. So, again, I was diagnosed with gestational diabetes. I was completely lost, but I was referred to a nutritionist, and I love my nutritionist. I only went there once. It was for like an hour, but she actually kind of broke down how everything worked as far as how your body processes the sugars, the glucose, the carbs, and all that, in conjunction with the proteins. Again, I'm not a nutritionist, so I will let you, if you can just kind of let us know like what's going on, what's important in the proteins, the carbs, and anything else that may be needed in order to manage gestational diabetes if a woman is diagnosed with it.
Yeah, definitely. So, gestational diabetes is a state of glucose intolerance. It's high sugar in the blood. That is being driven to these high levels a lot because of the placental hormones. So carbohydrate intake, sugar intake is the primary thing that we would monitor. Sugar, carbohydrates are still important in a pregnancy. They're a main source of energy for mom and for the baby. And carbohydrates is a huge group of foods. It's our grains, it's fruit, dairy has carbohydrates in it. So there's lots of other benefits to consuming those foods. We don't want to wipe them off the table because they are still very nutrient dense. But with the carbohydrates, it's a matter of kind of monitoring how much we're having, the types of carbs that we're having, and maybe even a little bit of when we're having them during the day. And the other piece then is how are they balanced out at the meal? What are we eating carbohydrates with? If we eat carbs on their own, chances are our blood sugars are just going to go up, and they might go up really high really quickly. But if we include those other food groups, if we include vegetables that have lots of fiber helps to slow the blood sugar response down. If we include protein, which could be animal proteins, right? It could be your beef, your chicken, it could be fish, certainly eggs, but it could also be like nuts and seeds and beans and things like that. The protein, critical building block for mom and baby during pregnancy. We want to have protein at every single meal, not only for pregnancy, but for the blood sugars. It helps to kind of keep them stable and from spiking super high. And that would also be the role for fats. So fats don't impact blood sugars directly, things like avocado or olive oils, again, those nuts and seeds type of thing. They also help to keep the blood sugars riding nice and stable. They also help you keep feeling fuller for longer. So if we are kind of monitoring our carb intake, maybe eating a little bit less of that group, we can certainly try to fill up more on these healthy fats and proteins.
Okay. Can you just give maybe just like one thing that you might swap a woman's diet with, or suggest that she swap her diet with? If she loves pasta, just which is a big one. I love anything white. I like bread. I love rice. I love pasta, like all of that. But is there any like one thing that you can suggest to maybe, again, just replace pasta for women?
Yeah, I'll give you two swaps because I think there's two ways you could look at it. You could look at a pasta like upgrade, right? So instead of like a white pasta, we could choose maybe a chickpea or lentil-based pasta, which is going to be higher in fiber, higher in protein. Still has carbs, but it might not spike your blood sugar as high or as quickly. So very pasta feeling and tasting and comforting, but different nutritionally. Or you could just totally swap the pasta and do like a veggie-based pasta. We could do a zoodles, we could do those palmini noodles, we could do spaghetti squash. So, it's kind of up to you. And based off of your blood sugar, pick the one that would work for you. Hope those are good swaps.
Yeah. Well, for me, I actually swapped out my pasta for zucchini. And it was wonderful. I even still do a zucchini dish now, like even after having the baby that the family actually loves. Then there's meat in there, but
half and half. You could always do half regular pasta and half zucchini noodles, right? If your blood sugars allow for that, let's do that. That works.
Yeah. So definitely a great idea. I'm going to get to one question I do see. What is your opinion or suggestion about a low carb diet or a keto diet in the trying to conceive period? Is that something that's suggested or even once a woman is diagnosed with gestational diabetes? I know the nutritional needs are different than when you're pregnant. Is that something that's suggested, or is it more just so like managing, make sure we're getting the right amount of carbs and proteins and fibers and all of that?
Yeah, from a preconception standpoint, I think it's hard to say. That can be so individualized depending on, if you are having fertility issues, or even if you're not, your hormonal profile. No one has kind of a standard profile going into conceiving. So, it's hard to speak on that. But I will say, generally speaking, women in keto is a really tough combination. Our hormone balances that regulate ovulation, that regulate implantation, having a successful pregnancy is so delicate. And oftentimes I don't find keto to be the most effective. We don't have a lot of research showing keto in this population and in women in general. There is definitely a benefit to consuming enough carbs to make sure your body feels secure and can actually then nourish and get that pregnancy off the ground. In pregnancy, then, on the other hand, I don't steer women towards a keto diet, which would mean very low carb. We're talking like 20 grams, maybe 30 grams a day. So we could go on and on about the reasons why I don't like keto really in general. But, in pregnancy, there's no need to push it down that low. Finding that kind of sweet spot, a moderate carb diet, I think is the way to go. We don't need to go super high carb, which kind of used to be the old way of thinking with gestational diabetes, but we don't need to push it down to that super low keto status in terms of the composition of the diet. There's plenty of keto marketed products out there that are these kind of higher fat, higher protein, using different sugar substitutes, I think, that are great and could certainly be included safely in pregnancy and work for so many of my patients with gestational diabetes. That's all in the branding, though, right? So it's maybe not following a keto diet, but it's utilizing some of those keto products in pregnancy.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. I did an interview not too long ago where the member, she was diagnosed with gestational diabetes, but she was on the keto before she conceived. And she kind of said it was a lazy keto. So she wasn't strict, but she realized, she was told not to have more than 20 grams of carbs a day. And she realized she needed more than that in just a meal. So I think it's important to say that, like, you don't want to starve yourself. You don't want to starve the baby, because I think that's what actually ends up happening. But if you can speak a little bit more on that, is that what actually happens if you're kind of depriving your body of carbs to an extent?
Yeah, carbs are, again, they're a big energy source. They don't provide as much, energy per gram as fats and proteins do, or specifically fats do, but they're still important. So when we're not getting enough carbs as the mama, right, that can maybe lead us to crave other things or overeat other things. If we're not getting enough carbs, we have enough constipation in pregnancy, and not including enough vegetables and fiber and whole grains would only make constipation worse. So I definitely see a lot more harm to going that super low carb keto way than not. Yeah.
Gotcha. So can you explain a little bit, why is it that some women, or it sounds like a good majority of women, can actually manage their gestational diabetes with diet, but some others can't? Like, they actually do need medication. What is going on there where women actually do need medication?
I think a lot of what I see comes down to kind of those risk factors that people had going even into their pregnancy. So, and this isn't maybe true for everyone, but I will say that more of my patients who end up needing to be on medication or insulin are perhaps the ones who are maybe older. Possibly they have a family history of diabetes. That's a big one that I'll see. They, end up needing to be on medication. Possibly women with a history of PCOS or other hormone imbalances have a tougher time once they get that GDM diagnosis, controlling it with just with diet and lifestyle. Because for them, or other people, they've maybe had some kind of like underlying insulin resistance going on. And then we combine that with the hormones from the placenta and boom, the body just can't keep up. So I think that answers your question maybe.
Yeah. Oh, okay. It does. So, but I am gonna kind of veer a little bit.
Yeah.
There's a question because we were talking about diet a few minutes ago. And I'm not sure if you see the question or not, but would you recommend replacing the processed sugar with a substitute and I've not heard of monk fruit or stevia to prevent gestational diabetes or even manage it?
Right. Definitely for management, those are two of the sugar substitutes that are recommended and safe in pregnancy. I see a lot of my clients using them. They don't have an impact on blood sugars. They're not causing your insulin to spike. So definitely in pregnancy, I would make those substitutions if you're going to do baking or, again, shop for these kind of keto products. They use a lot of things like monk fruit and maybe erythritol, which is one of those sugar alcohols, again, that doesn't impact blood sugars. In terms of preventing, again, sugar is one piece of the puzzle, right? So we can look at certainly your added sugar intake prior to pregnancy. And if you feel that, you're just consuming sugar on the regular, you're a baker, you like to, eat maybe more cakes and sweets and things like that, certainly making those swaps and using one of those sugar substitutes could be helpful. But I always say, zoom out, look at the rest of your diet. You can make all the sugar swaps you want, but if you're not eating enough vegetables, drinking enough water, getting good quality protein, getting enough sleep, keeping your stress in check, all of those things, if those aren't happening, those sugar substitutes are maybe not going to make as big of a dent as getting 2 more cups of veggies into your day is.
Gotcha. Okay, so I'll just say when I was diagnosed with gestational diabetes, I kind of feel like personally I probably was pre-diabetic because my diet was not the best. And so I kind of believe that my sugars, they were up. And now you have a practice and you work with women. What kind of services personally and professionally do you have to offer to women when they're diagnosed with gestational diabetes?
Yeah, so, like I said, I work at a private high-risk OB clinic here in New York City, but I do have kind of a personal private practice business where I will work with women, managing blood sugars through all spectrums, phases of their life, preconception, during pregnancy, or postpartum. So, I currently kind of the main way that I am aiming to work with women because I know this group, I know this population so well from my clinic job. I know that mamas diagnosed with gestational diabetes, they just want the information really fast. They want kind of a deep dive. They want to know a lot of things. They want to be armed with nutrition education. So the way I like to help women right now is I have an online program that kind of gives people a lot of this nutrition nitty-gritty information, gives them help and reassurance with making these types of changes. We have a community where other mamas can, join and they can support each other. And I also work with people one-on-one too, because I know people like that kind of person-to-person contact. They want a little bit more reassurance and advice from a health professional. So that's kind of the way that I work with people right now.
Okay, so do you work with women who are possibly pre-diabetic or actually have type 2 diabetes as well?
That's definitely a possibility. Yeah. I have worked with women who, are pre-diabetic or manage type 2 diabetes. If someone is on, medication or something, let's say, we'll obviously want them to follow through with their primary care doctor or an endocrinologist. But from the nutrition piece, absolutely.
Okay. And then if you can just tell us, I know you have your online sources. Do you actually meet with women in person? I know we have COVID right now going on, but do you actually, outside of COVID, is that something that you do or will do, meet with people one-on-one, or is everything kind of virtual?
I pretty much run everything virtually. Yeah, it seems to give the most flexibility, and just being here in New York City, office space has always been tough to come by. So the virtual option is what we have right now. Unless you're a patient at the clinic that I work at, then that pre-COVID had been in person, but I'm still virtual for them as well.
Okay. Okay. And then if you could just tell everyone how to get in contact with you, also how they can get into one of your programs. How do they find you?
Absolutely. Yeah. So most of the information to contact me and to learn about my programs is on my website, which is CaseySeidenNutrition.com. I'm actually in the process of updating the program right now. I'm going to be hosting, I can drop you the details you can share with the group. I'm going to be hosting a webinar at the end of the month, sharing all these new details to the program, which I'm really excited about. And then otherwise, I'll share those updates, and you can find me on social media. I'm mostly on Instagram, and my handle there is eat.well.together.
Okay. I'm going to ask you to repeat your website one more time. You cut out on my end, so I just want to make sure that everyone heard you on that end. So again, they can contact you. Your website is what again?
It's CaseySeidenNutrition.com.
Okay, and spell Seiden for us.
Yep, it's SEID as in David, EN as in Nancy.
Okay, and I'm just going to ask this question. Is everything kind of like personalized, or do you have a schedule where you offer classes, or is everything kind of personalized?
So yeah, that's why I came up with kind of the online program, because that is kind of a self-paced, do-it-yourself, deep dive type of a program. It's got video modules in it, tons of downloadable resources and handouts that I'm constantly updating. And then a Facebook group where I'll host kind of live Q&A office hours every month, and I'll bring in some guest speakers to talk about different aspects of it. You do have the option to upgrade and get a personal one-on-one consult with me. And possibly a follow-up if that's what you're interested in and need.
Okay, so you did cut out at me when you mentioned your Facebook group. So can you mention your Facebook group for us again?
Yeah, the Facebook group is part of my online program. It's called the Sweet Mama Strategy. So the Facebook group is where, mamas can just connect with each other, connect with me. I go in there live once a month to host kind of an office hours session, and possibly bring in some, experts in the field of diabetes, pregnancy, nutrition, things like that.
Okay. All right. So definitely good information. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Podcast live or at another time. You can always drop your questions in the comments, and I can forward them over to Casey, and she can help you out. But again, Casey, thank you again for joining us this evening. And we will definitely put your information in the show notes, and we wish you the best of luck in your practice.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Michelle. This was great.
Thank you, guys. Have a good evening.